The secure phone buzzed against my hip at 11:47 p.m. while I was 3 levels underground at the Pentagon, shoulder deep in classified server racks, trying to stop a coordinated cyber attack that was bleeding $45,000 per hour from our national defense systems. I pulled off my work gloves and checked the encrypted display. Wade Sherman, my supervisor at Advanced Defense Technologies, calling from his Arlington condo where he should be having dinner with his personal trainer girlfriend. My name is Garrison Mills. Everyone calls me Gary. I'm 47 years old, and I just got fired while managing a cybersecurity crisis that nobody else at my company knows how to solve. I almost didn't answer that call. When you're managing a security breach compromising military communications across 3 time zones, phone calls from corporate feel less urgent than the blinking threat indicators in front of you. But 22 years of being a reliable crisis manager conditions you to answer anyway. Mills speaking. Gary, it's Wade. I need to inform you of a company decision. Effective immediately, we no longer require your services as Senior Defense Security Architect. Your employment is terminated as of today. I looked at the threat console. Alert code red, still flashing across multiple screens. Database intrusion attempts showing 1,247 failed authentication probes in the last 8 minutes. 3 separate military communication networks completely isolated due to our emergency lockdown protocols. Nicole Parker, Pentagon Operations Coordinator, standing 10 feet away, looking at me with the kind of desperate hope you see when someone realizes their entire mission depends on one person who actually understands these 25-year-old legacy defense systems. I understand, I said, keeping my voice level. I'll inform Nicole that Advanced Defense Technologies will be handling the breach response procedures for the crisis I'm currently managing. Silence long enough that I thought the secure connection might have dropped. What crisis? The coordinated cyber attack that brought me here at 4 p.m. yesterday. 3 military networks are in full lockdown. The breach is costing approximately $45,000 per hour in communications downtime and operational delays. I'm in the middle of tracing the intrusion through 20-year-old mainframe protocols that predate most of your current staff. I assume you'll want to send someone else to complete the trace work since I no longer work for Advanced Defense Technologies. More silence. I could hear him breathing through the encrypted line. Gary, let's discuss this after you've resolved the Pentagon situation. I don't think that's appropriate. You just terminated my employment. I shouldn't be working on ADT projects if I'm no longer an ADT employee. I'll brief Nicole on what I've discovered so far and catch the next shuttle back to Virginia. Wait, Gary, let me call you back. He ended the call before I could respond. At 47, I thought I had maybe 18 good working years left before thinking about retirement, and maybe that cabin in the Shenandoah Valley my late wife, Sarah, always wanted to buy. I thought I'd built enough reputation and expertise to coast into my golden years with respect and security. That phone call changed everything, and maybe it was time. Isabella's medical bills were sitting on my kitchen table back in Alexandria. $32,000 due in 6 weeks for her spinal fusion surgery. Sarah had made me promise before she died that Isabella would get the medical care she needed, that our daughter wouldn't suffer because of financial constraints like Sarah's family did. Corporate loyalty wasn't going to pay that bill. Expertise might. Before I explain what happened over the next 72 hours, let me establish who I am and why that phone call was the most expensive mistake Wade Sherman ever made. I joined the Air Force right out of high school in 1995, spent 12 years in cyber warfare, learned computer systems when military networks still relied on protocols nobody teaches anymore. Back then, cybersecurity meant understanding how adversaries think and building fortress-level defenses. When I got out in 2007, defense contractors were realizing their old systems weren't going anywhere, but nobody understood how they actually worked. Advanced Defense Technologies hired me in 2008 as a network security engineer specializing in legacy military systems. My job was troubleshooting complex security breaches in systems that younger engineers didn't understand and couldn't fix. When a military installation got hacked and their IT department couldn't trace the intrusion, they called ADT. ADT sent me. Over 116 years, I'd responded to 284 security emergencies across 12 states and 3 overseas installations. I'd traced advanced persistent threats, diagnosed insider attack vectors. identified zero-day vulnerabilities, and stopped data exfiltration attempts that could have compromised operational security for thousands of service members. I'd worked through hurricanes, holidays, and family emergencies. I missed Isabella's high school graduation to fix a breach at Norfolk Naval Base. I spent my 45th birthday in a server room at Fort Bragg debugging assembly code while Sarah celebrated alone at home. That was before the cancer diagnosis. Before I learned that loyalty to your employer means nothing when you need time for oncology appointments and hospice care. Sarah died 3 years ago. Isabella's 20 now, junior at George Mason, studying computer science like her old man. She's the only family I have left, and her health isn't negotiable. Sarah used to say I was too valuable to let one company control my future. She'd grown up watching her father work 30 years for the same steel company, believing loyalty would guarantee security. When they got bought out, they eliminated his pension and laid him off at 58. Nobody looks out for you except you, Gary. She'd tell me during those long nights at the hospital, build something that's yours, not theirs. Most importantly, I developed deep knowledge of legacy military communication protocols that most of the defense industry still runs on, but nobody teaches anymore. Every installation had unique implementations. Every system had custom modifications. Every security model had quirks that existed only in my experience-based understanding of how those systems behaved under attack. That knowledge was what made me valuable. That knowledge was also what Wade Sherman had just eliminated from ADT's crisis response capability at the worst possible moment. The Pentagon crisis had started 31 hours earlier. Fort Belvoir, Norfolk Naval Base, and Quantico had all reported sophisticated intrusion attempts targeting their communication relay systems within 2 hours of each other. All three installations used similar legacy mainframe architectures. All three were experiencing identical attack patterns. This was the kind of coordinated attack that kept defense professionals awake at night. Someone with serious resources and deep technical knowledge was systematically probing the backbone of military communications infrastructure. This wasn't some script kiddie trying to steal personnel files. This was nation-state level sophistication. ADT's standard protocol was remote diagnostics first. I spent 6 hours on secure video calls with each installation's security teams, walking them through trace procedures and reviewing intrusion logs. By midnight Wednesday, I determined this wasn't something that could be resolved remotely. The attack pattern suggested someone with deep knowledge of military communication protocols was systematically probing for vulnerabilities in 25-year-old code that most people assumed was too classified to be worth attacking. They were wrong. Old code isn't automatically secure code. It's just code that nobody remembers how to fix when it breaks. I took the metro to Pentagon City Thursday morning, arriving at the secure entrance at 6 a.m. Nicole Parker met me at the security checkpoint. She looked like she hadn't slept in 3 days, which she probably hadn't. "Mr. Mills, thank you for coming. We've been in communications lockdown for 26 hours. CENTCOM is asking why we can't secure our own systems. Because this attack pattern is targeting vulnerabilities that require hands-on mainframe access to properly trace. I need to examine the communication protocols directly." She led me to the secure data center. 4 floors of humming mainframe computers, each one processing thousands of military communications per minute when they weren't locked down due to security breaches. All silent now, all offline, all costing the Pentagon approximately $15,000 per hour in operational delays. This was the kind of place that reminded me why I got into this business. These weren't just computers. They were the nervous system of American military operations. Every order, every intelligence report, every personnel communication flowed through systems like these. When they went down, missions got delayed and people got put at risk. I spent the next 9 hours tracing the attack through system logs, identifying the exact communication subroutines the hackers were targeting and mapping their intrusion methodology. This wasn't random cyber vandalism. This was sophisticated, methodical, and expensive. Someone had invested serious money in understanding exactly how these old systems worked and where their weak points were. By 6 p.m., I'd moved between all 3 installations, finding identical attack patterns across every compromised system. The hackers weren't just hitting random military targets. They were specifically targeting installations that still used legacy communication protocols I'd helped design back in the late 1990s when I was still learning this job. By 10:30 p.m. Thursday, I'd isolated the vulnerability. The hackers were exploiting a buffer overflow in legacy assembly code that handled encrypted military communications. The vulnerability existed in custom communication software that ADT had helped implement in 1999. I was part of the original development team. I was one of only 2 people who understood how that communication code worked. It's funny how technology works. We built these systems to last forever, and they did. But forever, in computer terms, means dealing with problems nobody anticipated 25 years later. The code we wrote in 1999 was rock solid for its time. We never imagined that hackers in 2024 would have the computing power and patience to probe for buffer overflows and assembly subroutines that processed maybe 500 communications per day back then, but now handled 50,000. Fixing it required patching 25-year-old assembly modules, updating mainframe security protocols, and implementing new input validation routines that would prevent similar attacks without breaking the military's existing communication systems. This wasn't like updating your smartphone. You couldn't just download a patch and restart. Every change had to be tested, validated, and implemented with surgical precision. One mistake and you could freeze military communications for days during active operations. I estimated 14 to 18 hours of careful programming work across all 3 installations. It was the kind of work that required not just technical knowledge, but institutional memory. You had to understand not just how the code worked, but why it was written that way. What assumptions the original programmers made, and how those assumptions had changed over 2.5 decades. I started at 10:45 p.m. Thursday night. By 11:47 p.m., I was halfway through updating the first set of assembly modules when Wade called and told me I was fired. After Wade hung up, Nicole approached me cautiously. You could see the panic starting to set in as she processed what she just overheard. "Mr. Mills, is everything all right? You look concerned. I just got terminated by my employer while in the middle of securing your communication systems." Her expression went from concerned to horrified. In her world, military communications didn't just shut down for maintenance. Every hour these systems stayed down was compromising operational readiness and putting service members at risk. "Terminated? But you're the only person who understands our legacy protocols. What happens to our systems?" That's an excellent question. Advanced defense technologies will need to send someone else to complete the work. How long will that take? The other engineer who understands these communication protocols is Jared Walsh. He's in Germany managing a NATO contract. ADT might have to wait until he becomes available. How long? Jared's European engagement is scheduled for another 12 days plus travel time. Nicole's face went white. I could see her doing the math in her head. We can't wait 12 days. Every day offline compromises operational communications and mission readiness. 12 days would put active operations at risk. Then I suggest you contact ADT Corporate and explain the urgency. At 1:15 a.m., my phone rang again. This time, it was Quentin Reed, ADT's Chief Operating Officer. Quentin had been with the company for 14 years and understood exactly how critical my role was to military crisis management. He was also smart enough to realize that Wade had just made a catastrophic error in judgment. "Gary, I just got off the phone with Wade. There's been a misunderstanding about your employment status. We need you to complete the Pentagon engagement before we discuss any personnel matters." "Quentin, Wade was very clear. He said my employment was terminated effective immediately. That's not a misunderstanding. That's termination." I could hear the desperation creeping into his voice. Quentin understood the implications in a way that Wade obviously didn't. This wasn't just about one disgruntled employee. This was about ADT's entire reputation in the military contracting industry. I understand this is confusing, but let's focus on resolving the communications crisis first. We can address your employment situation after you've secured the systems. I don't think that's appropriate. If I'm terminated, I shouldn't be working on ADT projects. If I'm not terminated, then Wade needs to call me back and clarify that he made an error. This is a critical national security situation. These communication systems are essential for military operations. We need you to complete the security patches. Then you need to clarify my employment status first. Am I an ADT employee or not? Long pause. I could hear Quentin thinking through the implications. If he said I was still employed, he'd be contradicting Wade's termination and creating internal political problems. If he said I was terminated, he'd be admitting that ADT had just eliminated their crisis response capability in the middle of their most expensive emergency. "Gary, Let me conference in Wade so we can resolve this together. I'd rather you didn't. Wade was clear about his decision. I'm respecting that decision by no longer working on ADT projects. If the Pentagon needs assistance, they should contact ADT's emergency response line and request another engineer. There is no other engineer available who understands these legacy military systems. That's an unfortunate situation, but it's not my problem anymore since I'm no longer an ADT employee. I ended the call. Nicole was standing nearby, having heard my side of the conversation. The weight of the situation was settling on her shoulders. At my age, I'd seen this look before. The moment when someone in management realizes they're completely dependent on something they don't understand and can't control. What should we do, Mr. Mills? You should contact ADT and request emergency engineering support. Explain the urgency of the situation. They'll prioritize getting someone here as quickly as possible. But you're here now. You understand our systems. You were in the middle of fixing the vulnerability. Can't you just complete the work? I thought about that carefully. Back when I was younger, I'd finish the job regardless of company politics because it was the right thing to do. But I'd learned something important over 16 years in corporate America and 12 years in the Air Force. Honor has to go both ways. I'd given ADT my best years, missed family time, worked through Sarah's illness, and built their reputation one crisis at a time. The moment it became convenient, they threw me away like broken equipment. Isabella's surgery was in 6 weeks. My mortgage wasn't going to pay itself. Corporate loyalty is a luxury I couldn't afford anymore. I was fired 89 minutes ago. I can't ethically continue working on a project for a company that just terminated my employment. What if we hired you directly, not through ADT, but as an independent consultant working for the Pentagon? Now that was interesting. I'd never considered going independent, but at 47, maybe it was time to think about options beyond the corporate ladder. Sarah had always said I was too valuable to let one company control my future. That would create contractual complications. The Pentagon has security agreements with ADT. Those agreements probably have exclusivity provisions preventing you from hiring outside consultants to work on ADT-designed systems. I'll check our contracts. She made several phone calls, had quick conversations that involved a lot of technical terms and urgent whispers, then looked at me with cautious optimism. Our legal team says the security agreement has exclusivity provisions for routine maintenance. But emergency patches can be conducted by any qualified consultant if ADT cannot provide timely support. They're defining timely support as within 24 hours of request. That was the opening I needed, not just to solve this immediate crisis, but to test whether there was a future beyond ADT. At 47, I was too old to start over at another company, but maybe not too old to start working for myself. Have you formally requested emergency support from ADT? She sent an encrypted email to ADT's emergency response team, formally requesting immediate engineering support for the military communications breach and noting that the previous engineer was no longer available to complete the patchwork. She marked it urgent and requested response within 6 hours. At 3:45 a.m., we received a response from ADT's emergency coordinator that told us everything we needed to know about how this was going to play out. We acknowledge your request for emergency engineering support. Our senior security architects are currently committed to other client emergencies. We are working to identify available resources and will provide an estimated response timeline within 8 hours. 8 hours. In corporate speak, that meant they had no idea how to solve this problem without me, but they weren't ready to admit it yet. Quentin was probably spending his Friday morning calling every contractor and consultant he could find, trying to locate someone who understood military communication protocols well enough to not make the crisis worse. Nicole showed me the email with the kind of desperate expression you see on people who are watching their career go down in flames through no fault of their own. What does this mean? It means ADT doesn't have anyone available to send. Jared is in Germany and apparently nobody else at ADT has the expertise to handle military communication vulnerabilities. So we wait, unless you want to exercise your contract provision and hire an independent consultant. Are you available as an independent consultant? This was the moment. At 47, after 16 years of corporate life, I was being offered the chance to work for myself, to set my own rates, choose my own projects, and never again have to worry about some manager deciding my expertise was too expensive. Sarah had been right. This wasn't a crisis. It was an opportunity I could be. What would your rate structure look like? I thought about that carefully. Independent consulting rates for emergency cybersecurity work typically range from $150 to $250 per hour, depending on expertise level and urgency. I was at the top of the expertise scale, and this was definitely urgent, but more than that, I was the only person available who could solve this problem. That kind of scarcity has value. $180 per hour for emergency security work, minimum 24-hour engagement to ensure complete vulnerability patching and system validation. That's $4,320 total payment terms. 50% deposit before I resume work. Remaining 50% upon successful system restoration. Nicole didn't even blink. When your military communications are down and you're facing congressional hearings about national security failures, $4,320 for a solution starts looking like a bargain. Done? I'll have our contracting office process the deposit immediately. The contracting process took until Friday evening. Government paperwork, even in emergencies, moves at government speed, but by 6:30 p.m. Friday, my secure phone chimed with a bank transfer notification. $2,160 had just cleared into my personal checking account. More money than I'd ever received for a single day's work in my entire career. At 7 p.m. Friday, I resumed work on the communication security patches, but now I was working for myself. The funny thing about doing the same work as an independent consultant instead of a corporate employee is how different it feels. Every line of code I wrote was billable. Every problem I solved was building my reputation instead of someone else's company. Every decision was mine to make. For the first time in 16 years, I wasn't just fixing someone else's crisis. I was building my own future, building something for Isabella's surgery, building something Sarah would have been proud of. By Saturday afternoon, I'd completed the vulnerability fixes across all 3 military installations. The work went faster than I'd expected because I wasn't dealing with corporate approval processes or having to document every decision for managers who wouldn't understand the technical details anyway. By Saturday evening, I'd updated the security protocols and conducted full system testing. By Sunday morning, all 3 installations were back online with no security vulnerabilities and no communication processing errors. Total lockdown time, 42 hours. Total operational impact, approximately $1.89 million. But the systems were secure, and the patches I'd implemented would prevent similar communication-based attacks in the future. More importantly, I'd just proven to myself that I didn't need ADT. They needed me. Nicole was watching the communication monitors with visible relief as encrypted traffic began processing normally again. The green lights were beautiful, each one representing thousands of military communications that had been frozen for nearly 2 days, finally flowing through the system like they were supposed to. Mr. Mills, I cannot thank you enough. You saved us from a disaster that would have been catastrophically worse if we'd waited for ADT to send another engineer. You're welcome. I'll prepare a technical report documenting the vulnerability, attack methodology, and patch procedures. You should share that with ADT so they can update their security documentation. At 9:30 p.m. Sunday night, I received a call from Quentin Reed. I was back at my apartment in Alexandria, exhausted, but satisfied with the weekend's work. More than satisfied, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Pride in work that was entirely mine. Gary, I understand you completed the military security work as an independent consultant. We need to discuss your employment status. Wade's decision to terminate you was premature. We'd like to offer you reinstatement with full back pay and benefits. I appreciate that, but I'm declining. I'm now operating as an independent consultant. It's more lucrative, and I have better control over which projects I accept. What does that mean for ADT? You're our most experienced legacy systems expert. It means ADT will need to develop other engineers with similar expertise or accept that your crisis response capability is significantly reduced. The truth was, at 47, I'd finally learned what my father never had the chance to figure out. He worked 28 years for the same manufacturing company, believing that loyalty and hard work would guarantee security. When the company got bought out, they eliminated his pension and laid him off at 56. He spent his last 9 working years bouncing between temporary jobs, never again finding the security he'd thought he'd earned. I wasn't going to make his mistake. Not with Isabella counting on me. That's not acceptable. We have ongoing client emergencies that require your specific knowledge. Then ADT should have considered that before terminating me while I was literally in the middle of managing one of those emergencies. Gary, I understand you're upset about how Wade handled the situation. I'm not upset, Quentin. I'm simply making rational business decisions based on new information. Wade demonstrated that ADT doesn't value my contributions enough to avoid terminating me during a crisis. I've learned from that demonstration. The next morning, I called Isabella at George Mason. She was between classes, grabbing coffee at the student union, probably stressing about her upcoming spinal fusion surgery and wondering how we were going to manage the $32,000 medical bill. "Dad, is everything okay? You never call on Monday mornings. Everything's fine, sweetheart. Actually, everything's better than fine. I have some news about your surgery." Her voice got tight, the way it always did when money came up. Isabella knew exactly how much her surgery cost, and exactly how hard I worked to pay for it. "What kind of news? The good kind. I just finished a consulting project that paid more in one weekend than I used to make in 2 months. Your surgery is covered, and you don't need to worry about payment plans or delayed treatment." Silence for a moment, then I heard her voice crack slightly. "Dad, what happened? You sound different." "I got fired Thursday night while I was fixing a Pentagon security breach that was costing the military $45,000 per hour." "Oh no, Dad. I'm so sorry. Do you need me to come home? I can take a semester off, get a job." "No, Isabella, that's exactly what you're not going to do, because getting fired turned out to be the best thing that could have happened to my career." I told her about the independent consulting work, about the Pentagon contract, about the other opportunities that were already starting to come in. I told her about the freedom of working for myself, setting my own rates, choosing projects that mattered. You know what your mother used to say? Nobody looks out for you except you. It took me 16 years to understand what she meant. Mom would be proud of you, Dad. She always said you were too valuable to work for just one company. That's exactly what she said. I should have listened sooner. Over the next 8 weeks, I received 7 emergency calls from military installations and defense contractors experiencing security crises. Each call followed the same pattern: sophisticated attack on legacy systems. ADT couldn't respond quickly enough. Could I help as an independent consultant? I helped all 7 clients. Total consulting revenue, $45,000 for 8 weeks of work. That was more than I'd made in the previous 8 months at ADT. Word spreads fast in the defense security industry. By October, I was receiving calls from installations that had never worked with ADT, asking if I was available for security audits and ongoing vulnerability consulting. These weren't emergency calls. They were military facilities that wanted to prevent emergencies by having someone who understood their legacy systems before problems occurred. By December, I had 5 long-term consulting contracts with defense installations who wanted guaranteed access to my communication expertise when they needed it. Combined retainer revenue, $8,500 monthly, approximately $102,000 annually, plus additional project fees. In January, ADT formally offered me a consulting arrangement, $180 per hour for active security work, $1,800 monthly retainer for availability and consultation, 12-month contract renewable at my discretion. I accepted because it was guaranteed revenue, and ADT represented one of the most reliable sources of emergency work. Wade Sherman lasted until March. The board terminated him after they calculated that his decision to fire me during the Pentagon crisis had cost ADT approximately $280,000 in lost client contracts, emergency recovery costs, and consulting fees they were now paying me instead of employing me directly. The irony wasn't lost on me. They were now paying me more in 6 months than they'd paid me in 2 years as an employee. Isabella's surgery was scheduled for April. Total cost, $30,000. Paid in full, no financing, no stress. When she called to thank me after the procedure, her voice was strong for the first time in months. "Dad, I can actually stand up straight. You gave me my life back. That's what parents are supposed to do, sweetheart. Take care of their children." At 47, I thought my career was winding down. Instead, it was just getting started. Here's what I learned from the entire experience. The most dangerous employee to fire isn't the one who complains about salary or threatens to quit. It's the one who's literally in the middle of solving a crisis that nobody else knows how to solve when you decide they're expendable. Because when you fire that person, you don't just lose their future contributions, you lose their ability to prevent the immediate disaster that's happening right now. And you discover that replacing specialized expertise during an emergency is impossible. Wade wanted to reduce headcount and eliminate what he saw as an expensive senior engineer. He got exactly what he wanted. I was eliminated, but my expertise wasn't eliminated. It just got a lot more expensive. Sometimes the best revenge isn't proving people wrong. It's letting them experience the full cost of being right about what they wanted. Wade wanted me gone. I was gone. Then he got to explain to his executives why the company's most critical client crisis was costing an additional $180 per hour, because the engineer who could fix it was no longer employed. At 47, I finally learned what my father never had the chance to figure out. Your value isn't determined by what one company is willing to pay you. It's determined by what the market will pay for what you know how to do, and sometimes the market values that knowledge a lot more than your employer ever did. Getting fired at 47 wasn't the end of my career. It was the beginning of my independence. Sometimes getting everything you never asked for teaches you more about your worth than getting everything you thought you wanted.